I'm posting this as a warning to anyone who might find themselves in a similar situation. I know most of you will think this is just another made-up horror story, but I'm begging you to take it seriously. If you ever find yourself driving through the mountains of Colorado and come across a little village called Ohio City, keep driving. Don't stop for gas. Don't stop for food. And whatever you do, don't let them convince you to stay the night. My name is David Coleman, and 3 months ago, I made the worst mistake of my life. The divorce papers were still warm from the printer when I decided I needed to disappear. Not literally, of course, just far enough away from the wreckage of my marriage and the suffocating concrete maze of Denver that I could breathe again. My graphic design business had been struggling anyway, and with everything going remote these days, I figured I could work from anywhere with decent internet. That's how I found the listing for a cabin in Ohio City, Colorado. The rent was suspiciously cheap for mountain property, but the photos showed a quaint little place surrounded by towering pines and snow-capped peaks. The kind of place where a man could think clearly, maybe get his life back on track. I should have paid more attention to why it was so cheap. The drive up took longer than expected. The road wound through the mountains like a snake with arthritis, all hairpin turns and switchbacks that made my Honda Civic wheeze in protest. By the time I saw the weathered wooden sign reading, Ohio City population 89, Est 1987, the sun was already kissing the mountain peaks, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if they hadn't made me so anxious about finding my new home before dark. The village itself looked like something from a postcard. Neat rows of wooden houses with steep roofs designed to shed snow, a small church with a white steeple, and what appeared to be a main street with a few shops. But something felt off immediately. For such a picturesque place, it was eerily quiet. No kids playing outside, no dogs barking, no one tending to their gardens despite the pleasant evening weather. I pulled into the only gas station I could see, a small outfit with 2 pumps and a hand-painted sign that looked older than I was. The building was already dark, which seemed odd for 5:30 in the evening, but I could see movement inside. An elderly man emerged before I could even get out of my car. He was tall and thin, with the kind of weathered face that spoke of decades spent outdoors, but his eyes held an urgency that made me uncomfortable. "We're closed," he said without preamble. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't need gas, just directions. I'm looking for..." "You'll want to get where you're going before dark, son." He was already backing toward his building. "This ain't the place to be wandering around after sunset. I'm actually moving here. Renting from Ruth Ashford. Maybe you know Ruth's place." His expression softened slightly, but the worry lines around his eyes deepened. "End of Maple Street. Yellow cabin with the green trim. You'd better hurry." He disappeared inside before I could ask what the rush was about. Through the window, I watched him flip off the lights and pull down a heavy metal security gate that seemed excessive for such a small, peaceful-looking town. Finding Ruth Ashford's house wasn't difficult. Ohio City only had about 6 streets, and Maple Street was clearly marked. What was difficult was shaking the feeling that I was being watched from every darkened window I passed. The houses all seemed to have their curtains drawn tight despite the early hour. Ruth herself answered the door before I could even knock, as if she'd been waiting by the window. She was a stern-looking woman in her 60s, with steel grey hair pulled back in a tight bun and the kind of no-nonsense expression that reminded me uncomfortably of my third-grade teacher. "Mr. Coleman, you're cutting it close." She stepped aside to let me in, but her eyes immediately went to the darkening sky beyond my shoulder. "Sorry about that. The drive took longer than I expected, and I stopped at the gas station." "Tom sent you along, did he? Good." She grabbed a ring of keys from a hook by the door. "We'll need to do this quickly. The cabin's just a quarter-mile up the road, but I want to get you settled before full dark." The cabin was perfect, exactly what I'd been hoping for. Small but cozy, with a stone fireplace, a loft bedroom, and large windows that would provide stunning mountain views during the day. Ruth showed me around with efficient speed, pointing out the propane stove, the wood-burning heater, and the reliable water pump. "Internet's decent up here, surprisingly," she said, indicating a modern router on the kitchen counter. "Phone service can be spotty, but the landline works fine." She paused at the kitchen table where a manila folder sat waiting. "Now, about the lease agreement." The terms were standard enough. First month, last month, security deposit. But Ruth made a point of flipping to the second page and tapping a paragraph that had been highlighted in bright red ink. "This is the most important part, Mr. Coleman. Tenant agrees to remain indoors between sunset and sunrise. No exceptions." I laughed, thinking it was some kind of joke. "Is this about noise ordinances or something?" Ruth's expression didn't change. "It's not a suggestion, Mr. Coleman. It's the only rule that matters here in Ohio City. But what if there's an emergency? What if I need to go to the hospital? Or there are no emergencies that can't wait until morning." Her voice had taken on a sharp edge. "This isn't negotiable. You either agree to this term or you find somewhere else to live." Something in her tone made me take the clause more seriously. I read it again, noting the formal legal language that seemed oddly specific for what I'd assumed was a simple cabin rental. "Can you at least tell me why? I mean, this seems pretty unusual." Ruth glanced toward the windows, where full darkness was finally settling over the mountains. "Some places have their own way of doing things, Mr. Coleman. Ohio City has survived by following certain rules. People who don't follow them," she shrugged, "well, they don't tend to stick around long." I signed the lease. What choice did I have? I'd driven 6 hours, paid a deposit, and burned my bridges in Denver. Besides, how hard could it be to stay inside after dark? I was planning to live like a hermit anyway. Ruth left immediately after I signed, practically sprinting to her old pickup truck. I watched through the window as she drove away, her headlights cutting through the darkness before disappearing around a bend in the road. That's when I noticed how quiet everything had become. I mean, completely quiet. No insects chirping, no owls hooting, no distant hum of traffic or air conditioners. Even the wind seemed to have died completely, leaving the night wrapped in a silence so profound it made my ears ring. I unpacked my essentials by lamplight, trying to shake off the growing uneasiness. Every time I glanced toward the windows, I found myself looking at black rectangles that reflected nothing but my own nervous face. The darkness outside was complete. No street lights, no porch lights, no soft glow of televisions flickering in distant windows. Around 10 o'clock, I was making myself a sandwich when movement outside caught my eye. Through the kitchen window, I could see a figure moving between the houses across the road. At first, I felt relief. Finally, another human being, proof that this wasn't some abandoned ghost town. But something was wrong with the way the figure moved. Too tall, for one thing, with limbs that seemed to bend at odd angles. And the gait was all wrong. Not quite walking, not quite running, but something fluid and predatory that made my primitive brain start screaming warnings. I blinked hard and looked again. The figure was gone. Exhaustion, I told myself. It had been a long day, full of stress and change. My mind was playing tricks on me, turning shadows into monsters. I finished my sandwich, double-checked the locks on both doors, and headed up to the loft bedroom. Sleep came eventually, but not easily. The silence outside was so complete, it felt oppressive, like being wrapped in cotton. I'd grown accustomed to the city's constant background hum, distant traffic, air conditioning units, the occasional siren. Here, there was nothing. It was like the entire world had been put on mute. I woke just before dawn to the sound of birds singing. The transformation was remarkable. Where the night had been dead silent, the morning came alive with normal sounds, robins and cardinals calling to each other, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, even the distant sound of a dog barking somewhere in the village. It was as if someone had slowly turned up the volume knob on the world. When I looked out the kitchen window while making coffee, I found a wicker basket sitting on my front porch. Inside were fresh eggs, a loaf of homemade bread, some local honey, and a handwritten note. "Welcome to town. Stay safe. The Hendersons." The kindness of the gesture warmed me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that "stay safe" carried more weight than a typical neighborly platitude. My first week passed quietly, and I began to settle into a routine that felt almost normal. I'd wake early, work on design projects until mid-afternoon, then walk down to the village center to grab dinner at Emma's Diner, the only restaurant in town. The food was simple but good, and Emma Mitchell, the owner, was friendly in that reserved mountain way. Emma was probably in her late 20s, with auburn hair she kept in a practical ponytail and eyes that held shadows I couldn't quite identify. She'd grown up in this village, she told me, though she spent a few years in Denver before coming back to take over the diner from her father. "Most young people leave and never come back," she said one afternoon while refilling my coffee cup. "The mountains aren't for everyone. But you came back." Her hand paused for just a moment. "Family obligations. Sometimes you don't have a choice." The other regulars at the diner were friendly enough, though I noticed they all shared the same habit of checking their watches frequently as the afternoon wore on. By 5 o'clock, the place would be nearly empty, and Emma would start cleaning up, even though sunset wasn't for another hour or two. "You close pretty early," I observed one day. "Early to bed, early to rise," she replied, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. I met most of the village's key figures during those first few days. Pastor William Crane ran the small white church and seemed to know everyone's business. He was a soft-spoken man in his 50s who had the kind of calming presence that made you want to confess your sins, even if you weren't religious? Settling in well, I hope, he asked when I introduced myself after the Sunday service. Very well, thank you. It's a beautiful place. Peaceful. Peace is important, he agreed. We work hard to maintain it here. Sometimes that requires discipline. Dr. Harrison Ford, and yes, he'd heard all the jokes about his name, served as the village's only medical professional. His clinic was a small building attached to his house, and I'd noticed that he kept unusually long hours during the day, as if compensating for something. Good to have another young person in town, he said when I stopped by to introduce myself and get copies of my medical records transferred. Though I do hope you're planning to stay. Planning to, yes. Why? He glanced toward the windows of his office, even though it was barely 3 in the afternoon. People who don't adapt to our way of life tend to leave suddenly. It's hard on the community when that happens. Everyone I met mentioned the rule in some way, always with varying degrees of urgency. Tom at the gas station would start rushing customers along if they lingered past 4:30. The elderly woman at the post office kept a large clock prominently displayed and would announce the time every few minutes once late afternoon arrived. Even the kids seemed to understand. I'd see them playing outside, but always with one eye on the sky, ready to scatter home the moment shadows started to lengthen. It was strange, but not threatening. Just a quirky mountain town with quirky mountain customs. I could live with that. Then my car broke down. I'd driven to Grand Junction for supplies. The local general store was adequate for basics, but I needed some specialized computer equipment that could only be found in a larger city. The trip went fine, but on the way back, about 10 miles outside of Ohio City, my Honda started making a grinding noise that quickly progressed to a mechanical death rattle. I managed to coast to the side of the mountain road before the engine seized completely. It was 6:30 on a Tuesday evening in late September, and full darkness was already settling over the mountains like a heavy blanket. I tried calling Ruth first, thinking she might know a local mechanic, or at least be willing to come give me a ride. The phone rang 4 times before she picked up. Ruth, it's David. I'm sorry to bother you, but my car broke down about 3 miles outside town, and I was wondering. No, the word was sharp and final. I'm sorry. I can't help you, Mr. Coleman. You'll have to figure something else out. But it's dark, and I don't have any way to. The line went dead. I stared at my phone in disbelief, then tried calling the gas station. Tom answered on the first ring. Tom, thank God. This is David Coleman. I rent the cabin from Ruth. My car broke down on Route 34, and I need... Click. He'd hung up on me. I tried Emma's Diner, Dr. Ford, even Pastor Crane. Same result every time, either no answer or a quick, panicked rejection followed by a dial tone. It was as if the entire town had agreed to abandon me the moment the sun went down. With no other choice, I locked my car, pocketed my keys, and started walking. 3 miles wasn't that far, and I had my phone's flashlight to guide me. The mountain air was crisp but not cold, and the road was well maintained. It should have been a pleasant evening stroll. It wasn't. The silence I'd noticed around my cabin was nothing compared to the oppressive quiet that filled the mountains at night. My footsteps echoed strangely, seeming to carry much farther than they should have in the thin air. The beam of my phone's flashlight carved a small circle of visibility out of the darkness, but beyond that circle, the world simply ceased to exist. I'd been walking for maybe 20 minutes when I heard something moving in the trees parallel to the road. At first, I tried to convince myself it was just a deer, or maybe a bear. Colorado had plenty of wildlife, and it made sense that animals would be more active at night. But whatever was out there was keeping pace with me, staying just far enough back that I couldn't see it, but close enough that I could hear branches snapping under its weight. I stopped walking. The sound stopped too. I started again, walking faster. The sounds resumed, matching my increased pace. I swept my phone's flashlight toward the tree line, but the beam wasn't powerful enough to penetrate more than a few feet into the forest. All I could see were dark pine boughs swaying in a breeze I couldn't feel, and occasionally a brief reflection of light from what might have been eyes. But the eyes were wrong, too high up to belong to any normal animal, and too widely spaced to be human. I broke into a jog, my heart hammering against my ribs. The thing in the trees kept pace easily, and now I could hear other sounds, low rustling that might have been communication, the crack of larger branches that suggested something much bigger than a deer. My jog became a run, and then a sprint. My phone's battery was dying, the flashlight beam growing dimmer by the minute, but I could see the lights of Ohio City ahead. Not many lights, just a few scattered porch lamps and the soft glow of curtained windows, but enough to mark the edge of civilization. Something crashed through the trees behind me, close enough that I could hear it breathing. I ran harder than I'd ever run in my life, my lungs burning in the thin mountain air. The sounds behind me grew louder, closer, as if whatever was chasing me had given up any pretense of stealth. I could hear multiple sets of footfalls now, heavy and fast, closing the distance between us with terrifying speed. I reached the village limits just as my phone's battery died completely, plunging me into absolute darkness. But the porch light of the nearest house was only 50 yards away, and I could see my own cabin beyond that, warm and welcoming and safe. Behind me, something let out a sound that might have been frustration or hunger. It wasn't quite a howl, wasn't quite a scream, but something in between that made every primitive instinct in my body scream in terror. I didn't stop running until I was inside my cabin with both doors locked and every light in the place blazing. Only then did I allow myself to collapse on the couch, gasping and shaking, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. Through the windows, I could see shapes moving at the edge of the tree line, tall shapes that seemed to sway and shift in ways that hurt to look at directly. They stayed there for maybe an hour, just watching, before finally melting back into the forest. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, I tried to act like nothing had happened. I called a tow truck from Grand Junction to deal with my car, made myself breakfast, and attempted to work on a logo design for a client in California. But every few minutes, I'd find myself staring out the windows at the tree line, looking for signs of whatever had chased me the night before. In daylight, the forest looked perfectly normal, just pine trees and aspen groves, with the occasional flash of a squirrel or chipmunk going about their business. If not for the raw terror still coursing through my veins, I might have convinced myself the whole thing had been a stress-induced hallucination. Around noon, I walked down to the village center, hoping to find someone willing to talk about what had happened. The response was mixed, but universally uncomfortable. At the gas station, Tom avoided eye contact while he rang up my purchase of beef jerky and water. "Heard you had some car trouble last night," he said quietly. "Yes, I did. I tried calling for help, but some nights are worse than others." He handed me my change without looking up. "Glad you made it back okay." "Tom, what exactly is out there? What was chasing me?" He finally looked at me, and I saw something that might have been pity in his weathered eyes. "Some questions are better left unasked, son. Some answers are harder to live with than ignorance." Emma was more forthcoming, but not by much. When I walked into the diner for lunch, she took one look at my face and poured me coffee without being asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said. I wish it had been a ghost. At least ghosts are supposed to be dead. She glanced around the diner, making sure we were alone, then sat down across from me. "You went outside after dark." It wasn't a question. My car broke down. I didn't have a choice. There's always a choice. Her voice was soft, but there was steel underneath. My brother thought the same thing once. That was 12 years ago. What happened to him? Emma's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her coffee cup. We don't talk about what happened to him. We don't talk about any of them. Any of who? The people who didn't believe in the rule. She stood up abruptly. "I have to get back to work." I tried to press her for more information, but she'd shut down completely. She served me a turkey sandwich and left me alone with my thoughts and growing paranoia. Pastor Crane was more philosophical when I found him later that afternoon, arranging flowers at the altar of his small church. "Fear is a powerful teacher," he said when I described my experience the night before. "It forces us to confront our own mortality, our place in the natural order." "This wasn't natural," I said. "Whatever chased me last night, it wasn't any animal I've ever heard of." He paused in his flower arranging, his hand stilling on a stem of white lilies. "Some things in these mountains are older than the village, older than any of us. We coexist by respecting boundaries." "What kind of boundaries?" "The kind that keep us safe." He turned to face me, and his expression was grave. "The kind that have kept this community alive for nearly 4 decades." "What about before that? What happened to the people who lived here before 1987? Pastor Crane's face went carefully blank. "I'm afraid I don't know what you mean." But I could tell he was lying. My most disturbing conversation came late that afternoon when I stopped by Dr. Ford's clinic to ask about getting a prescription for sleeping pills. The terror from the night before had left me wired and jittery, and I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep without chemical assistance. Dr. Ford was surprisingly accommodating, but as he wrote the prescription, I noticed his medical supplies were far more extensive than I'd expected for a small mountain town. Cases of blood bags, industrial quantities of bandages, and enough morphine to stock a battlefield hospital. "You seem well equipped," I observed. "I treat what I can, when I can." He handed me the prescription slip. some nights are worse than others. That's what Tom said. What makes some nights worse? Dr. Ford removed his glasses and cleaned them methodically, buying himself time to think. Patterns, he said finally. Migration patterns, feeding patterns, behavioral patterns. Most predators have them. Predators? Everything in nature has predators, Mr. Coleman. Even apex predators have things they fear. The key to survival is understanding where you fit in the food chain. I stared at him. Are you saying we're prey? I'm saying we're guests. Uninvited guests who've overstayed our welcome, but guests nonetheless. Our continued presence here depends on following house rules. That evening, I violated the rule again. Not intentionally. I wasn't stupid enough to go wandering around in the dark after what had happened the night before. But around 10 o'clock, I heard sounds coming from outside my cabin. Not the predatory movements I'd encountered on the road, but something that sounded almost human. A low moaning, weak and pitiful, like someone in terrible pain. I peered out the kitchen window, but couldn't see anything in the darkness. The moaning continued, seeming to come from somewhere near the tree line behind my cabin. It rose and fell in waves, occasionally breaking into what might have been words, though I couldn't make them out. Every instinct told me to stay inside, to follow the rule that had apparently kept the people of Ohio City alive for decades. But the sounds were so human, so obviously someone in distress, that my conscience wouldn't let me ignore them. I grabbed a flashlight, a real one this time, with fresh batteries, and unlocked the back door. "Hello," I called out. "Is someone out there? Do you need help?" The moaning stopped immediately. I waited, listening, but heard nothing except my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. After a few minutes, I stepped outside, keeping close to the cabin's exterior wall. I heard someone crying for help. I called into the darkness. "If you're hurt, I can call for medical assistance." Movement in the trees, subtle but definitely there. And then, from somewhere much closer than I'd expected, a voice answered, "Help me." It was definitely human, though strained and weak. A man's voice, middle-aged, with a kind of desperation that cuts straight through rational thought and hits you in the gut. "Where are you?" I swept my flashlight beam toward the trees. "Can you see my light? Help me, please. I'm hurt." The voice seemed to be coming from a small cluster of pines about 30 yards from my cabin. I could see what might have been a pale shape huddled at the base of one of the trees. I took a step forward, then another. My rational mind was screaming warnings, but the human need to help someone in distress was stronger. I'd made it about halfway across the clearing when I realized something was wrong with the voice. It was too steady. Someone in genuine distress would be gasping, crying, showing signs of pain or exhaustion. But this voice, while weak, had an artificial quality to it, like someone reading from a script. I stopped walking and raised my flashlight higher, trying to get a better look at the shape in the trees. It wasn't human. I can't adequately describe what I saw in that brief moment before the thing rose to its full height and I turned and ran. The closest I can come is to say it was like someone had tried to build a person from memory, getting all the basic components right, but assembling them wrong. Too tall, too thin, with joints that bent in directions that made my eyes hurt to follow. But the worst part was the way it moved when it realized I'd spotted it. Fluid and predatory, covering ground with impossible speed. I barely made it to my back door before it reached the edge of the clearing, and I could hear it testing the walls of my cabin long after I'd locked myself inside. "Help me," it called in that same artificial voice. "Please help me." It kept that up for hours, circling my cabin, trying different voices. Sometimes it was the middle-aged man. Sometimes it was a woman, crying. Once, terrifyingly, it sounded like Emma from the diner. I didn't sleep that night either. By the end of my second week here, I was a wreck. The lack of sleep was taking its toll, and the constant anxiety was making it impossible to concentrate on work. I'd started drinking more than I should, telling myself it was just to quiet my nerves, but knowing I was walking down a dangerous path. More importantly, I was starting to understand that whatever lived in the mountains around town wasn't going to leave me alone. The encounters were escalating, becoming more frequent and more aggressive. Whatever these things were, they'd marked me as prey, and they were testing my defenses. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. The breakthrough came when I drove to the library in Cedar Falls, the nearest real town about 40 miles down the mountain. I told myself I was going for legitimate supplies, more batteries, better locks for my doors, maybe a hunting rifle if I could find a sporting goods store. But really, I was going to do research. The Cedar Falls Library was a modest brick building that served 3 counties, and their local history section was more comprehensive than I'd hoped. It took me most of the afternoon, but I eventually found what I was looking for, buried in a box of old newspapers that hadn't been digitized yet. The Rocky Mountain Herald, October 15th, 1986. Search called off for missing hikers. 4 college students from Boulder had vanished while camping in the area that would become Ohio City. Their campsite was found intact, but there were no signs of struggle, no tracks leading away, nothing to indicate what had happened to them. December 3rd, 1986. Hunters report strange encounters in remote mountains. Multiple hunting parties described being stalked by unknown predators, hearing human voices calling from the darkness, finding campsites destroyed in ways that didn't match any known animal behavior. March 12, 1987. New community established in remote valley. A group of 37 families had pooled their resources to purchase land and establish intentional community dedicated to sustainable living and harmony with nature. The community was to be called Ohio City. May 20th, 1987. Mountain Community Reports. Success of unique lifestyle. An interview with several residents praising their innovative approach to coexistence with the natural environment and their carefully structured daily routines that ensure community safety. I found more articles over the next few months, all painting Ohio City as a successful experiment in sustainable living. But reading between the lines, I could see the real story. The families who'd established it hadn't come to the mountains looking for a new way of life. They'd come because they were running from something, and they'd figured out a way to survive. The last article was dated November 30th, 1987. Mountain Community celebrates first year of peaceful coexistence. The headline was innocent enough, but one phrase in the article made my blood run cold. Residents credit their success to a strict adherence to community guidelines, including a mandatory curfew that ensures no one is outdoors during dangerous evening hours. I drove back to town that evening with my mind racing. The village hadn't been established as an intentional community at all. It had been founded as a refuge by people who'd figured out how to survive something that hunted humans in the darkness. And somehow, they'd made a deal. That night, I decided to test my theory. I know how that sounds. After everything that had happened, deliberately putting myself in danger was the last thing any rational person would do. But I needed to understand what I was dealing with. And the only way to do that was to observe it directly. I prepared carefully. I moved my couch away from the living room window and positioned it so I could watch the forest while remaining hidden behind the curtains. I kept all the lights off and set up my phone to record video, though I doubted the camera would pick up much in the darkness. Then I waited. Around midnight, they came. I counted at least 6 of them, though it was hard to be sure because they moved in and out of my field of vision like smoke. In the darkness, I could only make out general shapes, tall, impossibly thin, moving with a fluid grace that no human could match. They approached my cabin from multiple directions, spreading out to surround it. For about an hour, they just watched. I could feel their attention like a physical weight pressing against the walls of my cabin. Occasionally, one would move closer, testing the windows or trying the doors, but they seemed to understand that I was safely locked inside. Then they started calling. "David." The voice was soft, almost seductive. "David, come outside. We want to talk to you." It sounded like Emma, but Emma with something wrong in her vocal cords. The words were shaped correctly, but the tone was off, like a recording played at the wrong speed. "We know you're curious," another voice said. This one sounded like Pastor Crane. "We can answer all your questions. Just step outside for a moment." "Your friends are worried about you," said a third voice. "Dr. Ford, they sent us to check on you." "Everything's fine, David. Just open the door." They cycled through voices I recognized, then voices I didn't. Men, women, children, elderly people. Sometimes they spoke in unison, creating a chorus of artificial human speech that raised every hair on my body. But through it all, I could see their true shapes moving in the darkness. Not human, never human, just things that had learned to mimic human sounds for their own purposes. The worst part came around 3 in the morning, when they brought out something new. "David." The voice was weak, terrified, and completely convincing. "David, please help me. They've got me, and I don't know how long I can." It was my ex-wife Sarah's voice, perfect in every detail, down to the slight lisp she'd had when she was scared. I knew it wasn't really her. Sarah was safe in Denver, probably asleep in the bed we used to share. But the part of my brain that still loved her responded anyway, and I found myself standing up, moving toward the door. I caught myself just in time, my hand already on the deadbolt. "Nice try," I whispered. The voice outside changed immediately, becoming something that definitely wasn't human. A low, frustrated growling that seemed to come from multiple throats at once. They stayed until dawn, testing every window, every door. calling out in voices both familiar and strange. But as soon as the first rays of sunlight touched the mountains, they melted back into the forest like they'd never been there at all. I sat in my living room as morning light filled the cabin, trying to process what I'd witnessed. These things, whatever they were, had been using human mimicry to lure people outside. That's what had happened to Emma's brother, to the missing hikers, to everyone who'd violated the rule over the years. But they couldn't enter buildings. That was why the village had survived, why the rule worked. These creatures were apex predators, but they had limitations. They hunted in darkness. They used deception rather than force, and they respected certain boundaries. The people of Ohio City had figured out how to coexist with monsters. They'd built their settlement within the creature's territory, but they'd done it on terms both species could accept. Humans stayed inside after dark, and the creatures didn't actively hunt them. It was a truce, not a victory. But it had kept both sides alive for nearly 40 years. I was starting to understand why everyone who learned the truth either adapted to it or left town quickly. This wasn't the kind of knowledge you could live with easily. Knowing that intelligent predators surrounded your home every night, that your survival depended on following rules created by something that wanted to eat you. It was the stuff of nightmares. But I was also starting to understand something else. The creature's behavior had been escalating since my arrival. They'd chased me on the road, tested my cabin multiple times, and used increasingly sophisticated lures to try to draw me outside. This wasn't normal behavior for a species that had been coexisting peacefully with humans for decades. Something had changed, and I was beginning to suspect I was the reason why. The answer to my suspicions came a week later in the form of a severe thunderstorm that knocked out power to the entire valley. I was working at my kitchen table when the first lightning strike hit. A brilliant flash followed immediately by thunder that rattled the windows in their frames. The lights flickered once, twice, then went out completely, leaving me in the grey half-light of an overcast afternoon. Outside, I could hear emergency sirens wailing briefly before cutting off with electronic pops that suggested widespread electrical failure. The storm had hit hard and fast, and it was only 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I tried my phone, but the cell towers were apparently down too. The landline was dead. For the first time since arriving in Ohio City, I was completely cut off from the outside world. Around 4:30, I heard someone pounding on my front door. I opened it to find my neighbor, elderly Mr. Patterson, clutching his chest and gasping for breath. His face was gray, his lips tinged with blue, and sweat was pouring down his forehead despite the cool mountain air. "Help," he wheezed. "Heart, can't breathe." I got him inside and onto the couch, but it was clear he was having a serious cardiac event. His pulse was rapid and irregular, and he kept drifting in and out of consciousness. I'd taken a basic first aid course years ago, but this was beyond anything I could handle. I needed to get him to Dr. Ford's clinic, and fast. The problem was that it was already getting dark. The storm clouds had turned the afternoon sky the color of charcoal, and full darkness would fall within the hour. But Mr. Patterson was dying, and I couldn't just sit there and watch it happen. I tried calling Dr. Ford first, hoping the landlines might still be working somewhere in the village. Miraculously, He answered on the third ring. "Dr. Ford, thank God. This is David Coleman. My neighbor is having a heart attack, and I need to get him to your clinic right away." There was a long pause. "What time is it, Mr. Coleman?" "About 4:45. I know it's getting dark, but this is an emergency. He's going to die if—" "I'm sorry. I can't help you." "What do you mean you can't help? You're a doctor." "I mean, I cannot and will not leave my house after 5 o'clock, not for any reason." His voice was steady, but I could hear the strain underneath. "He knows the risks. We all do. I can't help the dead, and that's what I'll be if I go out there. Then I'll bring him to you. Mr. Coleman, listen to me very carefully. Do not leave your house after dark. Do not bring anyone else with you. Lock your doors, turn off your lights, and wait for morning. If Mr. Patterson survives the night, I'll treat him at first light. I'm not going to let him die. Then you'll die with him, and his blood will be on your hands for forcing that choice." The line went dead. I stared at the phone in disbelief, then looked back at Mr. Patterson. He was barely conscious now, his breathing shallow and labored. I could see the life fading from his eyes, and I knew he wouldn't last until morning. I made the only choice I could live with. I bundled Mr. Patterson in blankets, loaded him into a wheelbarrow I found in his garden shed, and started the quarter-mile journey to Dr. Ford's clinic. It was 6:15, and full darkness was falling fast. The wheelbarrow made the trip awkward and slow. Mr. Patterson was a small man, but he was dead weight, and the wheels kept getting stuck in the gravel road. Every few minutes, I had to stop and check his pulse, terrified that he'd died while I was struggling with the makeshift transport. Halfway to the clinic, I realized we weren't alone. At first, it was just a sense of being watched, the feeling of eyes tracking our movement through the darkness. But as we got closer to the village center, I began to see shapes moving between the houses, tall, fluid forms that paced us from a distance, staying just at the edge of visibility. They were curious, I realized. This was new behavior, something outside their normal patterns, a human voluntarily exposing himself in the darkness, bringing another human with him. They didn't know how to respond. Dr. Ford's clinic was dark, but I could see a faint glow from the windows of his attached house. I pounded on the door until he answered, his face pale with terror. "You stupid, stupid man," he whispered. "Do you have any idea what you've done? I've brought you a patient who's going to die without treatment. And now we're all going to die because of your good intentions." But he helped me carry Mr. Patterson inside anyway, locking and barricading the door behind us. The clinic was equipped with basic cardiac care equipment, a defibrillator, oxygen, several drugs that could stabilize a heart attack victim. Dr. Ford worked quickly and efficiently, but I could see his hands shaking as he inserted an IV line and attached monitoring equipment. "He'll live," he said after 20 minutes of treatment, "assuming we all survive until morning." That's when I noticed the shapes outside. Through the gaps in Dr. Ford's heavy curtains, I could see them gathering. Not just the handful that had followed us through the village, but dozens of them. Tall, wrong figures that moved like liquid shadow, pressing close to the building from all sides. "They've never seen anything like this before," Dr. Ford said quietly. "In 40 years, no one has ever violated the rule to help someone else. They don't understand altruism. It confuses them. Is that good or bad? I don't know. Confused predators are unpredictable predators. We spent the next few hours in tense silence, monitoring Mr. Patterson's vital signs while the creatures outside tested the building's defenses. They scratched at windows, tried doors, climbed on the roof, but they seemed hesitant, uncertain. Their usual aggressive confidence was gone, replaced by something that might have been caution. Around midnight, Dr. Ford finally explained what I'd suspected for weeks. The village wasn't supposed to work, he said quietly, checking Mr. Patterson's pulse for the 100th time. When those 37 families first came up here, they were refugees. Survivors from communities that had been wiped out by these things. What are they? We don't know. We've never known. They're intelligent, they hunt cooperatively, and they've been in these mountains longer than human memory. The indigenous tribes that lived here before white settlement had stories about them, but those tribes moved south generations ago. They knew better than to stay. But you made a deal with them. Not a deal, an accommodation. We proved we could coexist by demonstrating that we understood our place in the hierarchy. We stayed inside after dark. We didn't interfere with their hunting patterns, and they didn't actively prey on us. What about visitors? People passing through? Dr. Ford's expression darkened. The accommodation only applied to residents, people who weren't part of the community. He shrugged. Nature has to balance itself somehow. I stared at him in horror. You've been feeding people to them. We've been surviving. Do you know how many mountain communities disappeared in the 1980s? How many settlements were abandoned with no explanation, no survivors, no bodies ever found? His voice was rising. Decades of guilt and rationalization pouring out. Ohio City is the only one that figured out how to live through it. By becoming accomplices to murder. By adapting to reality. These things are apex predators, Mr. Coleman. They're going to kill people whether we cooperate or not. At least this way, some people survive. The missing hikers, the hunters who disappeared. How many, Dr. Ford? He was quiet for a long moment. In 40 years. Maybe 24. Mostly people who ignored warnings, who wouldn't listen to reason. People who insisted on camping in areas we told them were dangerous. And me. Was I supposed to be one of them? Another pause. You weren't adapting. After 3 weeks, it was clear you were never going to accept the rule. You kept pushing boundaries, asking questions, attracting their attention. The community decided. He stopped. The community decided what? That you were a threat to the accommodation. Your behavior was making them more aggressive, disrupting the balance we'd maintained for decades. If you couldn't be made to comply, then... He gestured helplessly. Then I'd have an accident. A car breakdown at night, maybe. A hiking mishap. Just another tourist who didn't respect the mountains. It's not personal, Mr. Coleman. It's survival. I wanted to hit him. I wanted to scream at him, to force him to confront the moral bankruptcy of what he was describing. But before I could respond, something changed outside. The scratching and testing stopped. The shadows that had been moving restlessly around the building went still. And then slowly, they began to pull back. What's happening? I whispered. Dr. Ford peered through a gap in the curtains, his face puzzled. There. Leaving. Why? I don't know. But I thought I understood. The creatures had been watching us for hours, observing something completely outside their experience. A human risking his life to save another human, with no apparent benefit to himself. Behavior that ran counter to every survival instinct they understood. Maybe they were re-evaluating the terms of their accommodation with Ohio City. Maybe they were beginning to understand that not all humans were the same, that some were capable of genuine altruism even in the face of mortal danger. Or maybe they just found the behavior so alien that they decided we weren't worth the effort. We waited until dawn in tense silence. Mr. Patterson's condition stabilized, and by the time the sun crested the mountains, his color had returned to normal. He would live. Dr. Ford checked the perimeter cautiously before declaring it safe to move around. The creatures had indeed withdrawn, leaving no trace of their presence except for some deep scratches on the window frames that hadn't been there before. "You need to leave," Dr. Ford said as he helped me load Mr. Patterson back into the wheelbarrow. "Today. Pack your things and go, and don't ever come back." "What about the accommodation? Won't my leaving upset the balance?" "Your staying will definitely upset it. Last night changed things, Mr. Coleman. I don't know how, but it did. These creatures have spent 40 years learning to predict human behavior, and you just did something completely unpredictable. That makes you dangerous to both species." I wanted to argue, but I could see the truth in his eyes. Whatever had happened during the night, whatever message I'd inadvertently sent to the things in the forest, it had altered the careful equilibrium that kept Ohio City alive. I was no longer just a potential victim. I was a wild card in a game with rules I didn't understand, and my presence threatened everyone in the village. I spent that morning packing my few belongings, trying not to think about how quickly my mountain retreat had turned into a nightmare. The cabin that had seemed so perfect just a few weeks ago now felt like a trap, and every shadow outside the windows made me jumpy. Around 10 o'clock, Emma Mitchell knocked on my door. She looked haggard, as if she hadn't slept in days, and there were dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't hide. "I heard what you did last night," she said without preamble. "News travels fast in a small town. Dr. Ford told Pastor Crane, who told Tom, who told everyone else." She stepped inside without being invited, glancing nervously at the windows. "People are scared, David. More scared than I've seen them since I was a kid." "Scared of me?" "Scared of what you represent. Scared that the balance is broken." She sat down heavily on my couch, suddenly looking much older than her 30-odd years. "My brother was like you." "What do you mean?" "Stubborn. Idealistic. He couldn't accept that sometimes survival means making terrible compromises." Her voice became distant, remembering. "His name was Peter. He was 2 years older than me, and he thought he could fix everything. Thought he could find a way to fight back, to free the village from what he called our deal with the devil." "What happened to him?" Emma was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "He tried to organize resistance, convinced a few other young people that we could band together, arm ourselves, hunt the creatures during the day when they were vulnerable. He said we were living like prisoners in our own homes, that there had to be a better way. Did you join him? I was 17 and in love with him. Of course I joined him. A bitter laugh. We spent weeks preparing, bought weapons, studied tracking, convinced ourselves we were going to be heroes. Peter was so sure we could win. But you didn't. We found one of their nests, I guess you'd call it. A cave system about 5 miles north of here. During the day, they're dormant. Not quite asleep, but slow, vulnerable. We thought we could take them by surprise. She stood up abruptly, walking to the window as if she couldn't sit still with the memory. There were more of them than we expected. And even dormant, they were faster than we thought possible. Peter died trying to cover our retreat. The 3 other kids with us died too. I only survived because I ran instead of fighting. I'm sorry. The worst part was what happened afterward. The community was furious with us. We'd broken the accommodation, violated the truce. For the next 2 months, the creatures were more aggressive than they'd been since the 1980s. People died, David. Good people who had nothing to do with our stupid crusade. She turned back to face me, and I could see tears in her eyes. That's when I learned the truth about heroism. It's not about being brave or doing what's right. It's about understanding the cost of your actions and being willing to pay it yourself instead of forcing others to pay it for you. So you think I should have let Mr. Patterson die? I think you should have thought about the consequences before you acted. Mr. Patterson is 78 years old. He's lived his entire life following the rule, accepting the accommodation. He understood the price of his choice to live here. Her voice hardened. But now, because of what you did, every person in this village is at risk. Children, David, families who just want to live their lives in peace. I didn't have an answer for that. She was right, and we both knew it. My good intentions had potentially doomed an entire community. Dr. Ford says I need to leave today. Dr. Ford is right, but leaving might not be enough. Emma moved closer, lowering her voice. They remember scents, David. They remember faces. Distance helps, but it doesn't guarantee safety. What are you saying? I'm saying that breaking the accommodation might have consequences that follow you wherever you go. These things have been hunting humans for a long time. They know how to be patient. The thought chilled me more than I wanted to admit. I'd assumed that leaving would end my involvement with whatever lived in the mountains. But if Emma was right, I might have painted a target on my back that would never fade. I finished packing in silence, while Emma watched from the kitchen table. When I was done, she walked me to my car. The tow truck had brought it back the day before, repaired and ready to carry me away from this place. For what it's worth, she said as I loaded my bags into the trunk, I understand why you did it. Peter would have done the same thing. Thank you. Just try to stay alive, okay? Whatever happens next, don't let their sacrifice be meaningless. I drove out of Ohio City without looking back. In my rearview mirror, I could see figures standing at windows, watching my departure with expressions I couldn't read. Relief, maybe, or regret, or fear of what my leaving might bring. The mountain road seemed longer on the way down, full of switchbacks and blind curves that hadn't bothered me on the way up. Every shadow between the trees made me nervous, Every movement in my peripheral vision made me jump. It would be hours before I reached the interstate, and full darkness would fall long before then. But I made it to Grand Junction without incident, then pushed on toward Denver through the night. I drove straight through, too wired on adrenaline and coffee to sleep, and didn't stop until I reached the city limits as the sun was rising. Denver felt like another planet. The constant noise of traffic, the glow of streetlights, the simple presence of millions of other humans going about their lives. It was overwhelming after weeks of mountain isolation. But it was also reassuring in a way I hadn't expected. Whatever hunted the forests around Ohio City, it couldn't survive in this kind of urban environment. At least, I hoped it couldn't. I'm writing this from a small apartment in Seattle, as far from the Colorado mountains as I could reasonably get while staying in the continental United States. I changed my name, legally this time, not just an alias, and started over completely. New city, new identity, new life. But I can't shake the feeling that I'm still being watched. It started about a month after I left Colorado. Little things at first, sounds in the hallway outside my apartment that stopped when I tried to investigate, shadows moving wrong at the edge of my vision, the sense of being followed when I walked alone at night. I told myself it was paranoia, post-traumatic stress from my time there. Then I started finding things. A few weeks ago, I discovered animal remains in the alley behind my building. Drained of blood, bones cracked open in ways that reminded me of what I'd seen in the mountains. The city attributed them to feral dogs, but I knew better. Last week, I woke up to find scratches on my bedroom window, deep gouges in the glass that could only have been made from the outside. I live on the 4th floor. 3 days ago, I heard voices calling my name from the street below. When I looked out, there was no one there. But the voices continued for hours, cycling through different people, different ages, different accents, always saying the same thing. David. Come outside, David. We want to talk to you. I don't go out after dark anymore. I've had extra locks installed on my door, bars put on my windows, and I keep every light in the apartment burning from sunset to sunrise. My neighbors think I'm paranoid, possibly mentally ill. Maybe they're right. But sometimes, late at night, I see shapes moving in the alley below. Tall figures that don't quite look human, testing the boundaries of urban civilization, learning new hunting grounds, new ways to adapt. I think Emma was right about them remembering scents and faces. I think the accommodation I broke wasn't just between the creatures and the people of Ohio City. It was part of a larger system, a set of rules that governed how these things interact with humans everywhere. And I think I may have damaged something that was keeping all of us safe. Last night, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a newspaper clipping from a small Colorado paper, dated just 2 days ago. Tragic accident, claims Ohio City resident. Local man Harold Patterson, 78, was found dead in his home Tuesday morning. Authorities cite heart failure as the cause of death. Patterson had lived in the mountain community of Ohio City for over 30 years and was described by neighbors as a pillar of the community. They'd killed him anyway. Despite my intervention, despite the risks I'd taken, Mr. Patterson was dead, and I suspected his death wasn't from natural causes, no matter what the official report claimed. I'm posting this story as a warning. If you're reading this, you're probably safe. These things seem to prefer isolated areas, places where they can hunt without being noticed. But if you ever find yourself driving through the mountains of Colorado or any remote area where the locals seem unusually concerned about nighttime safety, please listen to them. Some rules exist for reasons you don't want to discover. Some accommodations are written in blood. And some things that hunt in the darkness have been doing it far longer than human civilization has existed to oppose them. If you're ever tempted to break those rules, to challenge those accommodations, remember this: heroism is meaningless if it gets innocent people killed. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is walk away. I only hope I realize that soon enough. The sun is setting outside my window as I write this, and I can already hear them gathering in the alley below. Tonight might be the night they finally lose patience with urban hunting and come for me directly. If I'm wrong about the protection cities provide, if distance wasn't enough, then this story will be my obituary. If you never see an update from this account, you'll know the accommodation was broken beyond repair, and you'll know that some debts follow you no matter how far you run.